Welcome to you all on behalf of Essex Mind Spirit, who seek to promote the link between mental health and spirituality, that within the faith communities of this area. I'm Mark Thompson, chair of the local group in North Essex. A big thank you this morning to St John's for hosting this event, to Vicar Andy Sachs and to the PCC, as well as to Wendy and Dave in the background there, and indeed Nick. Today we focus on the needs of young people in these increasingly unsettling and disturbing times. COVID restrictions limit our numbers. However, this presentation will be accessible to you on YouTube, which will be the link will be sent out later today. Formalities over, it's a joy and a privilege to welcome Mark Wood of the Corbin Project, a local organisation pioneering support for vulnerable young people. So a big welcome to Mark, and hopefully there'll be a chance to a few questions having heard the presentation. So a big welcome to Mark.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to be with you today. I'm just going to give a very brief introduction about myself before I give you a bit of an outline of how we're going to look at the topic of young people, mental health and spirituality. I normally like to move around quite a bit when I talk, so if I occasionally look a bit uncomfortable, that's probably just because I've got to be here so we can make sure it goes out well on the video. But as I say, my natural style is to move around a bit, so I'll try and stay in this place so Nick can get a good video feed on me. I've been working with young people for over 20 years now. I've worked. I set up a charity working with young people in crisis in Hertford, where I used to live. Set that up around the age of 24. And we worked across a lot of churches, schools, we did outreach work with young people, and we worked with young people with mental health issues, drugs and alcohol issues, young people experiencing family breakdown, all kinds of different situations that young people found themselves in where they needed just a bit of extra support, really. Sometimes quite professional, sometimes a lot more relational and a lot more relaxed in the way we delivered it. I did a master's degree in addiction psychology and counselling, which I graduated in 2012. And my kind of focus on that was actually the role of spirituality and religion in treatment for young people, in young people's treatment for substance misuse. So that was really interesting. It was a really useful bit of work, and I'll draw on that a little bit today. But obviously it was quite a long time ago, so things have moved on. So I'll be giving some of the latest research as well. So that's me. If I could go to the first slide, Nick. I think it's probably also good to say, isn't it, that so I live in Colchester. I'm married. I've got two daughters aged 6 and 9. Moved here about 5 years ago. And I'm part of a local church, Kingsland Church in Lexington. And I give you that background because I think it's always really good. I really appreciate knowing a little bit about people's personal situation as well. You know, I'm here not just as a professional, but as someone who's, has my own life. And I've had my own experience of mental health issues, both personally and with family members. So that's the context that I come from. That's what I'm going to bring today. So as you can see, we're looking at, I'm going to give you a bit of definition around what is youth, what are young people, what are we talking about, because that term can be applied quite broadly. What are young adults? What is young people's mental and emotional health? What's that all about? Where are we at currently? What kind of issues are young people struggling with? Obviously, the impact of coronavirus on mental health is really important, isn't it? Then we're going to look at what is spirituality. What actually is that? Because again, that term is applied in lots of different ways. It can mean lots of different things. I remember reading a sociology professor who said that, it's a term that a lot of people use, but we're in danger of not actually really knowing what it means. Then we're going to look at, what do young people want? What kind of support do they want for their mental health? What's out there? And I will obviously share a bit about Corbin, because that's my day-to-day outworking of this topic. And we'll have a look a bit at what other support services are available. So I hope that's okay. Yeah, good. Got a few nods. That's good. You're all on board with that. Brilliant. So I thought I'd start, next slide please, Nick, with, we were all young once, weren't we? So I'd like you, if you just can for a moment, just to think about when you were young, maybe ideally the age between sort of 13 to 15. And I would normally take a little bit of feedback, but maybe with the current situation with masks and social, let's call it physical distancing, because we can still be social. Just maybe if you can just think for a minute about what it was like that age from sort of roughly 13 to 15, what it was like being young for you. And if you are feeling brave, if you want to, you could just stick up your hand and maybe just share one word. Just pop your mask down, just share one word rather than a bit of a story if you want to. If not, we'll get stuck in. Anyone? Scary, thank you. Challenging, yeah. Thank you very much.
11 to 15, I had a lovely time.
Yeah?
It was good.
Okay, great, yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Jackie.
Concern over fitting in.
Right, yeah, absolutely. Okay, we'll take one more if anyone wants to go. Yes?
Isolated, because I lived in a farm, miles away from people, but I did have school, so isolated.
Right, yeah.
Seeing other people apart from the animals, really.
Wow, yeah. Oh, thank you.
Could be lonely as well.
Yeah, isolating can be lonely, can be challenging, scary. All those things really describe. Okay, yeah, one more.
Overwhelmed. I came from a small school. I used to be a school just here, little 3 or 4 classes really, and I went to big comprehensive on Grinstead, and there was 1,000 pupils, and it was like, whoa.
Yeah, big shock, big transition, big change. Absolutely. I mean, you've highlighted lots of different things there. Actually, for some people, being a young person is great. It's a great experience. And I'm sure that for those of us, even if we did find it challenging, there was difficulties, well, hopefully there were some good times as well. But it is a time of profound change, isn't it? When we're talking about young people in this presentation, for the majority of it, I'm going to be talking about young people aged 11 to 17. Some people include 18, sometimes 18 gets included, but we'll say 11 to 17, 11 to 18. And actually youth, the whole period of youth, is a cultural or societal invention. If you go back 150 to 200 years, the period of youth was really a period from 13 to 15 years old. That was it. If you look at different cultures, let's say Jewish culture would be a good example. You hit 13, and then you became a man or a woman. You went from, in the space of that kind of transition mark, you went from being viewed as a child to suddenly now, at the age of 13, you have your bat mitzvah for a girl or bar mitzvah for a boy, and you're an adult. And now you're morally accountable. That's how the Jewish culture looked at it. You're morally accountable for your actions. But today, we're seeing physical changes start a lot younger with that age group. So physical changes are starting, often even in primary school. That wasn't happening 150, 200 years ago. or if it was very, very rare. So we're seeing physical changes start younger. I know you had a presentation, I think, on this recently, but it's well known now that brain development continues into people's early 20s. So the prefrontal cortex, which is the kind of judgment bit of the brain, that's still developing all throughout the teenage years. So that's the bit of the brain that deals with rationale, reasoning, thinking things through, making good judgments. And so when young people are growing up, they are really working a lot of the time from the more emotional responses. So I'm sure that's probably, if you think about your own experience of being young, you're probably aware that you didn't always think things through as much. Part of growing up is actually learning to take risks. And again, that's connected with brain development as well. And there's also, so there's not only big hormonal changes, psychological changes, but there's also a lot of legal changes that happen. And, I can't give you all of those, but there's changes around, obviously, when you can have alcohol in pubs with meals. When you can, the age on cigarettes changed, didn't it, quite a few years ago now. You now have to be 18 to buy cigarettes, used to be 16. But there's lots of changes that happen right up until people are age 21, and I tracked them once, and there's a change almost every year from about 11 to 21 in terms of young people's sort of legal status and what they're allowed to do and what they can and can't do. And I think if I remember, the last one, you might want to just check me on this, but is the age of 21 when people are legally allowed to adopt for the first time. So there's all these changes that happen legally, cognitively, psychologically, emotionally, physically, and then there's really big changes, aren't there? Like the lady mentioned here, that you, during that period of development and the transition, you can go from being in a primary school, a really small primary school, to suddenly being a huge secondary school, and quite often there's a vast amount of diversity that people experience throughout that transition as well. So hopefully that gives us a good kind of foundation. Yes?
So the thing is that they don't get full pay and the minimum wage until they're 25 now?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Good point, yeah. Benefits, for example, because I work in homelessness and supported housing, that's a really good point. You can't get a housing benefit if you're under 25. You can only get a shared room rate. So that shared room rate really doesn't give people many options in terms of benefits and getting a property in Colchester. There are options. It's not impossible, but it can be pretty challenging and quite difficult. So, if we can have the next couple of points, please, Nick. Thank you. You know you're getting old, don't you, when you suddenly have to adjust your glasses. It's like I'm really in denial about that, but so obviously young people are clearly different to adults. You can see a quote I've put up there by Scott and Steinberg. This was way back in 2008. Not only in terms of the developmental stage and the situations they find themselves in. So it makes sense that we should treat young people different to adults, doesn't it? And I think we don't always do that, especially perhaps in terms of mental health and treatment. But it's also worth remembering that not only do we need to think of young people being different, but actually there's this term, emerging adolescence, that young people are really, they're still not fully adults, really up until around the age of 25. That's what most of the research is telling us. It is a little bit controversial, that idea, But you only need to think about some of the kind of life transitions that people make. Obviously, you've talked a bit about brain development already. To think that actually young people are not have not fully moved into the adult world often, not always, but until they're in their mid-20s. Okay, so I think we've probably done enough on that now to lay that foundation. The only other thing I thought I must really mention, because it's really important, is the impact of technology, particularly at that age. And I'll just give you one stat around mental health that might help earth that for you, ground that for you. So Jean Twenge wrote a book called iGen, and in the book, Jean, she really looks at the changes, particularly in self-harm and suicide risk amongst young people. And she says from 2009 to 2015, social media use amongst teenagers increased from around 50% to around 82%. And screen time increased up to estimates of around 6 to 9 hours a day in that same period. That increase in use correlates with more suicide risk factors. So we can't say it's causal. The research doesn't prove that. We can't say that. But what we can say is around the time that young people's self-harm and suicide risk increased over that period of time, and there's various different studies. There's a British Medical Journal study in 2017. So as there was an increase in self-harm and suicide risk over that period, there was also a massive increase in screen time and social media use. So it's highly likely, isn't it, that those two things are linked. Okay, so what's happening today in terms of young people's mental health? You can see there's some stats from NHS Digital. Hopefully you can see that okay. I'm just going to go through them briefly. This was the last sort of report that came out. It was a couple of years ago, since 2004. So it was the last report around young people's mental health since 2004. So it's been quite a gap there. The last comprehensive report, I should say. So this is from the NHS Digital. And what we see is that 1 in 8 children and young people aged between 5 and 19 has a diagnosable mental health condition. So that's nearly 13%. The prevalence of 5 to 15-year-olds experiencing emotional disorders, including anxiety and depression, has increased by nearly 50%. So that's from around 4% in 2004 to nearly 6% in 2017. So again, that's quite a significant increase. Nearly a quarter of young women aged 17 to 19 has an emotional disorder. Over a third of the young people aged 14 to 19 years old who identified as LGBTQ+ has a mental health condition, as opposed to 13.2% of those who identified as heterosexual. So obviously these are only the people who identified in that way, but again it shows a really significant difference there. Around a quarter of 5 to 19-year-olds with a mental health condition, only a quarter had contact with mental health specialists in the past year. So meaning that around 75% hadn't had any contact with mental health services. So that's kind of where we're at today. So I'm sure none of that in some ways is a big surprise to you. Big increase in mental health, big increase in emotional health issues amongst young people. But, that's kind of the hard and fast evidence, if you like. And what that tells us really is that early intervention is crucial, isn't it? It's crucial. And I've got two more stats just on the next slide. The Homeless Link report, that should be on the next one, actually. I think that's not meant to be on that slide. 50% of mental health problems are established by the age of 14. So that's adults who experience mental health issues. 50% of those are established by the age of 14. And 75% of adults with a diagnosable mental health problem experience the first symptoms by the age of 24. So again, it just really underlines, mental health is a massive issue, but it's particularly important when people are young that they get good intervention. Obviously, my background, my interest is work with homeless people, homeless young people. Corbyn, we work with 16 to 25-year-olds, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of what happens with young homeless people. So Nick, thank you. Hopefully you can see that okay. Just gives you a bit of a breakdown of in this particular survey, it's a Homeless Link survey that's done once a year. I think actually the latest one's just come out, but I didn't quite get to that in time. Around 5,000 young people are involved in this survey. Around 5,000 young people involved in this survey. If we go to the next slide, you can see there's a variety of support needs that the young people have, but 35% of them had mental health support needs. So it's much higher than the general population. Now, that's a lot of people, isn't it? Over a third. And if we have next slide, please, Nick. I think it's really important to remember that home has a huge impact on all of our lives, but particularly on people's mental health. And I love this quote from Edward Casey. It's called Getting Back into Place, a book that he wrote. And he says, to lack a primal place is to be homeless indeed. Not only in the literal sense of having no permanently sheltering structure, but also as being without any effective means of orientation in a complex and confusing world. And then got another quote by, it's not a quote, but something by Ed Loring. He argues that housing is foundational to life. In the wilderness, shelter is second only to air in the priorities for survival. You can live 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter in really difficult conditions, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. Now, he comes from Canada, so obviously if you get in the wilderness in Canada, you're in big trouble, aren't you? But it's fair to say people can experience really harsh conditions in the UK, and it's just really underlining actually that place is really important. And why I wanted to bring that in is because a lot of what we've, in the foundation that we laid and in listening to you share, is that actually being young and going through that transition of youth can be challenging, confusing, difficult, scary, and homelessness is kind of similar in many ways. That phrase that lacking any effective means of orientation in a complex and confusing world. So if people experience that when they're young, they experience homelessness and youth, then those kind of issues can be really compounded. That not only are they experiencing all the challenges that the rest of young people go through, but also they're experiencing homelessness as well. Okay, any questions so far? And then I'm going to look a little bit at the impact of COVID on mental health, young people's mental health. No? Okay. I'll give another time for questions, later as well. But if there's nothing, then I'll move on. Great, thanks, Nick. So Young Minds did a survey with around 2,000 young people. They've done a couple of these throughout, certainly throughout lockdown. I know we're sort of easing out and then possibly going back in now, and there's, even that is a bit confusing, isn't it? And a bit destabilising, or can be very destabilising, particularly for some of our residents. But Young Minds did a couple of surveys. This was their second survey they did in June, and it was around the time national restrictions were actually eased, and the target was for schools to fully reopen in the autumn term. So there was some kind of sense of progression, sense of things changing and beginning to come back towards normality at this point. And 80% of participants in this survey agreed that the coronavirus pandemic had made their mental health worse. So that is a lot of young people. And you can see that some of them, 41%, actually said it was much worse, which was up from 32% in the March survey. So the longer it's gone on, again, I'm sure this isn't, you might expect this. It's not rocket science, but it's good to have some data around it, I think. And the next one is that 87% of participants agreed that they had felt lonely or isolated during the lockdown period. Out of more than 1,000 accessing mental health support in the 3 months prior to the crisis, including from the NHS, schools and university counsellors, private counsellors, etc., 31%, so around 310 people, said they were no longer able to access the support but still needed it. And that's been a really big challenge throughout this situation. Those that had not been immediately accessing support before the crisis, 40% said that they had not looked for support but were struggling with their mental health. And 11% actually said their mental health had improved during the crisis. And that was often because it was helpful to be away from some of the pressures they might normally be experiencing in everyday life, for example, like bullying at school, things like that. Okay, where are we at? Right. I need to move things on a bit. So what about spirituality? How can spirituality benefit young people? What is it and what are some of the benefits? So I've put a bit up there about contrasting spirituality with religion and with faith. The key thing about spirituality, according to Geppert was a researcher, psychology writer in this, and his colleagues, they state spirituality is about seeking purpose and a sacred connection. It's a more informal and personal approach than religion. There are lots of different things we could say about spirituality, but that's one of the key things is about some kind of search for a sacred connection, engaging with something transcendent, but it's often more informal than organised religion. There's some stuff about religion, but I think, in interest of time, actually, I'm gonna move on a little bit. So next slide, please, Nick. Thank you. Spirituality has a massive impact on mental health. If you look at the literature, I had to do a big literature review for my masters, and this has only been further supported as time's gone on. But if you look at the literature, there's really no argument that spirituality has, and religion actually, that spirituality and religion have a positive impact on mental health, broadly speaking. There are some times where those two constructs can perhaps not be helpful, but on the whole, there's just a huge volume of academic literature that supports the positive impact of spirituality and religion on mental health. The only kind of real argument around it is, what does spirituality mean? What is it? And, how does it work? How does it impact people's mental health? And the same with religion. Is it that because people are part of a church, for example, they get support from a congregation? Does it break down isolation? Those kind of things. So there's a lot of argument about what the benefits are and exactly how people experience the benefits. What mediates those benefits you talk about in this kind of in an academic context. But there isn't any argument that these two constructs, spirituality and religion, have a huge impact on people's mental health. And Deborah Corner, who did some work for the Mental Health Foundation, a big report a number of years ago now, but she looks at some of the more common themes in spirituality, that people gain and are looking for a sense of purpose, a sense of connectedness, and that can be to with self, with others, with God, with nature. There's a sense often of a quest for wholeness, a search for hope or harmony, and a belief in higher being or beings. So there's that sense of the transcendence, that sense of purpose, and trying to, to make meaning out of life. That's a big part of spirituality. Next slide, please, Nick. How are we doing for time? Yeah, not too bad. In terms of adolescence, in terms of young people, the research shows that it's particularly important to adolescents, and it's usually considered a protective factor. So that means it might, spirituality can help to stop people developing mental health issues, other kinds of psychological issues. So it can be what's called protective. Their involvement in spirituality might help them not get into drugs and alcohol, for example, in certain forms of spirituality. Just as a bit of an aside, actually, what I noticed when I did my research amongst the young adults that I interviewed who were in treatment, they actually associated spirituality with the occult. That was the word for them. That's what it meant for them, was a connection with the occult. So it doesn't tend to mean that to most people. That's not generally what we're talking about in these kind of settings when we talk about spirituality. But actually, the young people I interviewed, I did qualitative analysis, so it wasn't lots of young people, it was deep interviews, and they were young people in treatment, which is a really notoriously hard group of people to engage and get to do research. And there's really not much research out there done amongst young people in treatment, and they said that all of them associated spirituality with the occult in some way or another. So that's quite an interesting finding. And actually, generally the occult is not associated with people. Generally the occult is actually linked with people with drug and alcohol use. There's a link there. It's not a protective factor in that respect. Does that make sense? So I feel like I almost contradicted myself there. I'm trying to just give you a bit of clarity around that, particularly for that group of people. But for the general population, actually, religion and spirituality can really be a protective factor that helps with a number of issues like mental health and such. The top quote there that you can see is actually from US research, and you tend to find that there's a lot more inclusion of religion and spirituality in US research, partly connected with their population and but in the UK, actually the Royal College of Psychiatrists published some great stuff on their website and you can see that was from 2015. And they said that actually patients said they gained better self-control, self-esteem and confidence. They got faster and easier recovery, often through healthy grieving of losses and through recognising their strengths. They gained better relationships, and they had a new sense of meaning, hope and peace of mind, which enabled them to live and accept and live with continuing problems or to make changes where possible. That was the impact of spirituality in terms of the people that the Royal College of Psychiatrists surveyed and looked at. So we've got some, good UK data as well. There's lots of good stuff from the UK. I've got another bit of research now. What do young people actually want? And there's a whole variety of things that young people would like to help with their mental health. This is not particularly spirituality. They don't particularly talk about spirituality in this survey. But this just gives you some ideas of coming out of coronavirus, hopefully, as the situation develops. 200 young people were interviewed, around 200 young people, by the Essex Council for Voluntary Youth Services. So these were young people who were engaged in youth service provision or youth organisation provision often via Zoom, that kind of thing. And they said what they think adults could do to help improve young people's mental health during lockdown. So there was, fun activities, things to do on Zoom, distractions from gaming and TV, social media activities, YouTube channels, being more supportive if they were feeling down and helping them to have positive mental health, having proper conversation. So the young people in this survey really valued adults having proper conversation with them, not just asking them how they felt. And they said they valued family time. They actually wanted to spend time doing family activities and chilling out together, going on walks, things like that, board games. They also asked for almost the opposite of that, having more space and time alone when they needed it, especially if they got younger brothers and sisters. And the last one was letting them exercise more so they don't feel trapped at home. So those were only a selection. I think there's about 15 answers in the sort of top answers across that survey. But these were young people who were already engaged in youth activities to some degree over Zoom. They obviously had to engage in some way so they could get them to do the survey at that time. So I think it's important to kind of tie it a little bit together and just help you to think about a bit what's out there for young people. So we looked at how spirituality can help. I've got to say, in my experience, spirituality isn't included very much in work with young people in terms of generic youth work and youth provision. It does get touched on. I'm not saying it doesn't happen at all, but it isn't high in the mix when it comes to working with young people. At Corbyn, yes.
Can I just say that all of what you said there is all the basis of 12-step programs. So when they're working with addiction or when they're working in that sort of thing, that sort of spirituality is very big in 12-step programs like NA.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, but actually there's not many young people well represented in the 12-step movement overall. You do get some young people in 12-step, but it's pretty... most 12-step movements don't have a lot of young people represented in, and there are different reasons for that, so I could go into that. Yes? Good question. 12 steps are, it originated in the 1930s in the Christian holiness movement, and then got developed, particularly initially in the US, by two former alcoholics, affectionately known as Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson, and they developed a 12-step program which helps people with addictions to become abstinent. So it's you don't have to pay to be part of the 12 steps. The idea is obviously that membership's anonymous. People can go to meetings and they get a chance to kind of talk about where they're at, learn from other people. There's not really a hierarchy. The meetings, there is a structure, they are organised, but, and it's a key part of the 12 steps is that, step 2 is that we turn our lives over to a higher power. So the idea of addiction it's really difficult to control, so people need help to get their lives to become manageable again. And they've often tried many different ways of doing that, and the 12-step program helps them to do that in a way that accesses some kind of transcendent power. And for different people, that's different things. So for some people, it will be God. It might be Christian God. It might be Jesus. It might be Allah. It might be the group consciousness in the room. It might be their own, there might be a sense of connection with a loved one who's died. Yeah, so people access that kind of spirituality in different ways. But on the whole, there aren't a lot of young people in the 12-step movement, unfortunately. Shall I just say a little bit about Corbin and then what other support's out there? Yeah? Probably the best way to do it. I could talk a bit about Corbin and go through some of our kind of mission and vision and all of that. I've got a 5-minute video which will push us slightly over time. Is that okay, Mark? Or? Yeah? Brilliant. So... Oh, okay, Nick. I thought you said you got that one. The link, the YouTube link. Oh. Okay, I thought that had come through on the email, that had come through, okay. Oh, straight, okay, fine. Right. Okay, oh well, we haven't got that video, that's a shame. I'll just show you some pictures then. So Corbin, we're about breaking the cycle of homelessness in Colchester by giving young people a home and supporting them to move on and live independently. And really our mission, the way we do that is about providing supported housing for young people in crisis. So we focus on 16 to 25-year-olds. Next slide, please, Nick. We aim to provide quality, safe, stable, supportive accommodation which feels like a home. Excuse me. We give young people a healing experience of family. That's our aim. That's a big thing for us. We do that by sharing meals. We eat together. We laugh together. We work in partnership with the local church and other professionals and service providers. That's really important for us as Corbin. We empower young people to grow and mature, and we do that through investing in them and believing in them as individuals. We just give it all we've got, and we believe in them. You can imagine there's lots of ups and downs, and we just believe in them right through that process, really. I said to a young man the other day, it's always helpful to have stories, isn't it? I said to a young man the other day, he's been going through a really difficult time, there's lots of different stuff going on in his life. And I said to him, I just really challenged him about his own responsibility, and the next day he came back and apologised to me, and I thought, my goodness, this really doesn't happen often in my experience of working with young people over 20 odd years. So he apologised to me, and I said, do you know what, let's call him Jim. I said, do you know what, Jim, I love you, I forgive you, and I want the best for you. And it's really important for people to hear that they're believed in. Really important, I think. So that's another one of our values. You can see that we work holistically with young people, looking at their psychological and spiritual needs, and we give professional and genuinely caring support. Now, I'm going to move on a little bit just to show you some pictures, because I think that's always good, isn't it? And then tell you what other support is out there. So, Nick, if you can skip through the next 2 slides. Okay, so these are just some pictures. We don't use young people's faces. We believe in protecting their confidentiality. That's one of our communal meals, communal barbecues. You can see that we organise different projects for the young people to get involved in to help make their house feel like a home. Yeah, and next one as well. Thanks, Nick. We provide holistic support, recognising their physical, psychological and spiritual needs, like I said, and one of the ways we do that through helping them engage with creation, with nature. We do that in the garden. We get them so they get to learn skills, they get to be outdoors. We talk alongside them while we're doing that kind of stuff. And at our communal meals, we always start off with some kind of form of thank you. So we start off with some kind of form of thanks. So for young people who are not religious or wouldn't consider themselves religious or spiritual in any way, they might just say, I just want to say thanks for the weather this week. I just want to say thanks for the sun. Some young people say, I want to thank God for helping me get a job. Some young people they don't really want to do it, and that's okay. We don't put pressure on, but we think that thankfulness is an important part of spirituality, and being grateful is a good thing to nurture in people, and giving the young people a chance when we eat together, when we come together as community to do that is really good, I think. One of the other ways that I haven't got any pictures of this, but for obvious reasons, one of the other ways that we offer spiritual support is we'll offer young people the opportunity to pray about things if they want us to. Again, we don't force that on people, but just the other day, I was in the office, and this guy was going through just a really difficult time, lots of uncertainty, and his background. He was brought up in a Christian background, and I said to him, "Look, if you want to, we can pray about this. This is something we can pray about." And I said, "I'm not interested in forcing that on you, but if you think that would be helpful." He said, "Oh, what could we pray about?" And I said, "Well, we could pray that you get a job. That would be a good thing to pray for. That's a practical need you have at the moment, isn't it?" I said, "Yeah, okay then, let's do that." So we prayed for him to get a job, and actually his employment situation, he'd not been in work. He managed to get a little bit of work over the summer, but not been in work since. And the next day he came and said, "Mark, we prayed together and I've got a job." Amazing. So we believe that, we believe that there is a God who answers prayer at Corban. We believe in making that part of the support we give young people. We do that in an inclusive, holistic way. And we also draw on their own experiences to help them make meaning and make sense out of their life. And I think that's really helpful too. What else is out there in terms of support for young people? And I'll wrap up now. We've got Christian Youth Outreach. They work in schools, and they help young people engage with spirituality through prayer rooms and RE lessons and all kinds of different activities that they do with young people. In terms of other kind of provision, there's the Colchester and Tendring Youth Inquiry Service. They provide counselling for young people, so you can get free counselling through the Youth Inquiry Service. There's the Emotional Wellbeing and Mental Health Service that I'm sure many of you are aware of. Again, website there. There's Mid and North Essex Mind Youth Support Services, Colchester Mind, Teen Talk Harwich, Essex Health Watch, and that's more of a signposting thing. And there's also the Youth Service. Through lockdown, it has been pretty difficult for young people to engage with a lot of these services unless they want to do it digitally, unless they want to do it on Zoom or some other, web conferencing kind of software. And that really has been a challenge for a lot of young people. And in Corban, actually, because we're residential, often what we've done, because it's been difficult to access the support we need, the way we've done it is actually to provide our own. Obviously within the limits of our professionalism and our own, expertise and practically what we can do as a service. But I think it's vital to try and meet young people where they're at. And certainly that's what we've tried to do. We have been able to engage other support services, but it's definitely harder throughout lockdown, and particularly if people don't really want to engage digitally, that makes things really difficult for them. And just to finish off, I think it is a time that actually spirituality and making meaning and finding purpose is more important than ever. A lot of young people feel very confused, very uncertain, very isolated, and certainly what I believe as a Christian is that our spiritual lives really matter, and that actually if people can engage with spirituality, then that can give them a sense of purpose and some kind of foundation or some kind of consistency to get through the next however long this lasts for, and also through just some of the general challenges of being young and growing up in the UK. Thank you very much.
Will we get a copy of these slides?
If you'd like them, absolutely.
Yeah, 'cause these links are going to be really, really useful. I've got some people I'd like to share them with.
Absolutely, yeah, really happy to do that, yeah.
Yeah, we certainly will. We'll get those to you. Maybe some questions to
Yeah, absolutely.
Mark. If we could, I was going to ask you how many young people are there at the moment in the centre?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, good question. So we have 5 young adults in our hub house. So that's the St Anne's Vicarage. And then we've got 3 at our move on house. And actually through lockdown, I mean, we did all kinds of things to help them, with their mental health. We were able to do a lot of our stuff socially distanced in the garden. We've got a big garden, which is a massive blessing, particularly over the summer. We did barbecues. We supported them to paint their own rooms, which they really loved, and it obviously gave them some, real sort of sense of value. While we were doing that, we were often having spiritual conversations about meaning and purpose, and what the next steps are in life. And we did actually have someone. Once the restrictions started to ease, one of our residents moved on to his own council place. So we have had a little bit of movement in the project, but not a lot. But actually, right now, we're going to see 3 young people move on very quickly. So we do supported housing. Do you want to know a little bit about supported housing? Is that helpful or not? I didn't say much because I wanted to make, Mark's brief for me was kind of young people and spirituality and mental health. And, you can find out a lot about Called by going onto our website and having a chat with me afterwards. We've got the mask on and everything. But supported housing is really about, obviously you give people a place to live, but they have like a program of support where they meet with, the way we do it is they meet with us for an hour a week planned, and then any other support they need the rest of the time. So we're not 24 hours, we're not staffed 24 hours, we have CCTV. We help them with things like budgeting, with looking for work, with getting into, volunteer schemes, education, training.
Sorry, at what age?
Oh, yeah. So I did put it up earlier, but I didn't say it. You're right. Yeah, 16 to 25. We work with 16 to 25-year-olds, and like I said, obviously we help them with, often help them with things like they're thinking about their meaning and their purpose in life as well. If that's what they're interested in, if that's relevant. Yes.
How long would they normally stay with you? Not in COVID time, but in normal. Would they leave before they would go on, or does that vary from person to person?
Yeah, good question. Sorry, what's your name?
Pauline.
Pauline, thanks Pauline. I've met you once before, but so we give young adults, when they come to us, we give them a licence for a year, and then we'll extend that. That's for the main house, and then the move on house is 6 months. So if they just go to the main house, then after a year, we're really looking at helping them to move on. That's obviously difficult, it's challenging because there's not a lot of options for them in terms of accommodation. I could get into all the detail of that. We get 1 nomination a year for council property. So there's a banding system, young people have to bid, and then they, depending on where they're at in the banding system, depends on the priority they get around council housing. But, we see young people move on to house shares. Over the last 3 years, we've seen 4 young people go to university. So that's pretty amazing. That's rare for supported housing. And I would honestly say I believe that's because, whether the young people are interested in faith or not, we pray for them. We pray for them that God's going to bless them, that they're going to, get good work opportunities, good education opportunities, get good places to move on to. That's what we believe. We see that blessing outworks in their lives, whether they are interested in acknowledging that or not. We see great things happen through the project. So, that's definitely
Do you find a lot of the people come from care, the civic care?
Good question, Russell. Actually, we do have some young people in care come through our project, but not a lot for us. That's not to say there's not a lot out there, but there's other supported housing projects in Colchester, not just Corban. So yeah, it does happen, definitely, and we definitely, young people we work with have had contact with social care, but may not have been in, they may have managed to stick it out with their families, for example, or just not been picked up for whatever reason, or not got to the threshold where they, yes, Jackie.
It's more of a thought rather than a question. But, I mean, I said I had a really easy 11 to 15-year-old, probably 11 to 18-year-old. But I didn't engage with the news. I mean, the kids today get the news on their phones and everything, don't they? And I mean, when you read the newspapers, they just love a horrible story, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, kids are getting this all the time. This isn't everything awful, isn't everything bad, isn't it? Which, certainly when I was that age, I didn't engage with the news. I mean,
Yeah.
it didn't come on my radar, so it must affect them.
Well, I heard us. I wish I could remember which country it was, but they said, "Oh no, it wasn't. It was the Amish community in the States," and some spokesperson was asked, why hasn't coronavirus really affected the Amish community? And they said, well, because we don't watch TV. we don't look at our screens a lot. We don't have screens. Now, I know that I think there's a bit of a context to that, obviously, but yeah, I think media has a huge impact, and that's why I wanted to. I could have said a lot about mental health, but why I just wanted to give you that one particular stat around the increase in screen time and social media, and smartphones, particularly when smartphones became prolific, had a huge impact on self-harming and suicidal ideation and suicide risk factors.
Thanks very much, Mark. I'm aware of the time, and we are kind of restricted with our time, unfortunately. Yep. But it's good to know that you can refer to this presentation through the link which we'll send you, and that will hopefully include all the papers as well, all the information as well, which is terrific. We might even be able to find your link, your video, which unfortunately has got mislaid.
Yeah, I was just going to say actually.
Which will be, I think, a source of blessing for us as we see the results of the work that they're doing through this particular 5-minute video.
Yeah,
we'll try and send that to you as well.
Just to give you a highlight quickly about that, and it will be quick, is you can get that on our website. If you go to our front page, it's on our front page. We'll send it out as part of this, and it's just a young person being interviewed with me, one of our residents who was happy to go on camera obviously and talk, and he's just talking about the impact of being at Corban during this time, and touches on some of these these things, these themes that we've looked at today.
Yeah. Well, many thanks to you, Mark, for this input, and we'll show our appreciation, please.
Thank you very much.
Time doesn't permit for much more than this, but you refer to the website and you'll get a lot of information there. But we'll keep you in touch with any other future meetings that we plan, as we've said before, at certain times. Thank you all very much.